Outrage over the death of Charlie Kirk continues as both Republicans and Democrats and their supporters blame each other for political violence. Charlie Kirk was killed last week while addressing students at a university campus in the state of Utah. U.S. President Donald Trump responded by ordering the national flag to be flown at half-mast and awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom posthumously, the country's highest civilian honor. And then Trump had this to say.
Well, the problem is on the left. If you look at the problem is on the left. It's not on the right, like some people like to say on the right. The problem we have is on the left. And when you look at the agitators, you look at the scum that speaks so badly of our country, the American flag burnings all over the place, that's the left, that's not the right.
Do you plan on investigating?
We'll see. We'll be announcing. They're already under investigation. You know, they're already under major investigation. A lot of the people that you would traditionally say are on the left.
They're already under investigation?
Already under investigation.
So, what is the state of U.S. politics? How will the nation move forward? To discuss this and more, let's bring in our guests. Joining us here in Washington, D.C., Frank Sesno is a professor of media and public affairs at George Washington University and a former CNN Washington bureau chief. From Miami, we're joined by Jadan Horyn. He is a political analyst. Also in Washington, D.C., Douglas Sloan is principal at the National Capital Strategy Group. And Adolfo Franco is an attorney and Republican strategist. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Adolfo, let's start right here in the studio. Listening to that little bit that the president said there, I mean, he blamed the left. You know, he said that 3 times. The problem is the left. He called them scum. He said they're under investigation. At a time like this, when the country is so divided, when politics is so polarized, wasn't this an opportunity for the president to rise above the fray, to rise above political differences and bring the country together? Did he miss that?
Well, I think the president did in his address try to bring the country together on this. But there is an underlying question. I think in this program, you're going to have a lot of, if you're asked, a lot of reaction of, this was horrific, this was terrible, and I believe, and I know all the other guests believe that and genuinely believe it and are going to say that. This is terrible, all political violence should be condemned, and so forth. And of course, everybody agrees with that. But then there has to be some forensic or some, which I think the president is getting to, seeing what's really behind all of this. Now, that's why we might have some disagreements on this, is you're going to have, well, there are extremists on both sides, and this is a problem of bringing it together, and so forth. I think what the president is trying to say, and I share the view, is that it isn't an equal matter. In fact, it's been building for a long time on the left, in my opinion. You have a situation in this country, and when this has not happened, the president might have cute names for people, but just quickly, does not refer to people as Hitler, Mussolini. I'm talking about Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton, Hakeem Jeffries with a bat, saying we're going to go to the streets, Schumer saying we're going to go after you, Kavanaugh, Justice of the Supreme Court, who was later a target.
The president might want to find out what's behind this, what's causing these divisions, etc. But this called for statesmanship.
I think, well, the president said it was horrible. The president said it should be condemned by everybody. But the president also wants to understand what the root cause of this. Let me tell you something on that, just my opinion. You know my views are on the right and a conservative. But whether it was the election in November or what happened now, I think this is a watershed moment for moderates and people who are not political. Because I think they see the rhetoric and the extremism on the left, resistance, Hitler, a threat to democracy. We're not saying those things. And I think Charlie Kirk's death has now caused people in the middle to simply say, this is a result of that really vilification of political views of the president, his party, and the way he's been portrayed. And I think that is at the root cause. Look at what was said on the casings on this bullet. Take it, you fascist. This is what they've been calling on this program. Some people have called Donald Trump a fascist.
Yeah, I guess we'll be learning a lot more about the person who's been arrested in the coming days. I'm going to get to Frank Sesno. Frank, good to have you with us. Both sides, left and right, blame each other for these acts of violence. The historian Kevin Boyle, who's at Northwestern University, he wrote a piece in which he said, today's political and rhetorical landscape is intensely polarized and fueled by anger, distrust, and conspiracy theories. It's easier to target your political opponents for violence if you see them as enemies of the nation. What are your thoughts on this? And is this a relatively new phenomenon, or have these divisions always been this deep?
Well, we've always had divisions. No, they're deeper, they're louder, they're angrier, and they are quicker. This is a result of social media. This is a result of the algorithms that refresh the reels or whatever it is that you're looking at before you even have a chance to scroll through your screen, and just feed you more and more of this. So it's not that the hate hasn't been out there. It has. Hatred's been out there since human beings, learned to feel an emotion, but it's more intense, much louder, and much more pronounced now. I think that we have seen a dramatic shift in our culture. I came to Washington when Jimmy Carter was president. I was a kid. My first White House was Ronald Reagan's. Ronald Reagan had the 11th commandment. The 11th commandment was, thou shalt not criticize another Republican. What we have now is criticisms across and within the parties of everyone at all levels. And I think what Adolfo was just saying is very true. We have a very disturbing level of otherizing in this country now. But I think this is very complicated. It's many things. And if we're really serious about getting to the causes of this and addressing it, we're all going to have to step back, acknowledge that this is a complicated picture, and be willing to have a serious investigation and conversation about what's really happening here and why, and yes, where it's coming from on all sides.
Right, and Frank, that process of stepping back and taking a look at this, shouldn't that process be started by the person at the top?
Yes, it should. I mentioned that I came to Washington when Jimmy Carter was president, and I've observed this so many times in recent days. What we have seen throughout time, certainly in modern times when there was a microphone and a camera, is the president at times of crisis, national tragedy, becomes the mourner-in-chief, the convener-in-chief. And whether it was Ronald Reagan after the Marine barracks bombing in Beirut, or George W. Bush after 9/11, when he went to a mosque and said this is not going to be a war against religion, or other events with any number of sorts and types, we have the president who says, we need to have a conversation, we need to come together, calls for calm, calls for conciliation. And that's my concern now, is that the heat is so turned up and the rhetoric from leaders is so intense. It was newsworthy when the governor of Utah, Spencer Cox, said we need to find a better way.
Yes.
Typically, that would be the president saying that.
Jadan Horyn, the killing of Charlie Kirk has polarized left and right even further. But could it be a moment when both sides reassess these divisions? Because we do see both sides, left and right, condemn this assassination.
Yeah, I think what is really interesting about this entire thing, and something that I've kind of taken a step back and analyzed, is that every elected official rightly expressed their outright horror at what occurred, and that continued for hours on my feed on television, and yet I started seeing online, I started seeing posts, trollish posts on Reddit, on Discord, expressing joy and glee. And, this was something that I saw in the aftermath of, Luigi Mangioni's assassination of the United Healthcare CEO. And so what I think is interesting is that there is a civic polity, that traditional civic virtue that our elected officials are demonstrating, and properly so. But everyday Americans, for the most part, they're horrified. But there seems to be a large subset that is happy. And I think, in years past, as tumultuous as something like 1968 was, there wasn't there wasn't a megaphone to magnify the types of voices that might have expressed joy or glee at Martin Luther King's assassination or RFK's or JFK's. They didn't have a voice to say those things in a way that people could see and be horrified that they're seeing that. And today we can. And I think what it should open to our politicians is it should open their mind to that a large portion of their supporters might actually be people who have taken the words, tones, and language used in the art of politics and taken that to mean literal action as opposed to rhetorical action.
Yeah.
Politics is an art of war and battle, but it is decided in our democratic republic, obviously at the ballot box ultimately, but also in creating alliances and horse trading and all types of things that people think is unseemly, but that's how it gets done. But yet the reality is that there's a large subset of people that do not understand that, and they truly do believe that the answer is a bullet. And I think it's our politicians who need to realize that there is that dissonance, because right now they're not seeing it.
Yeah,
either side, you're just not seeing the dissonance.
Yeah, Douglas Sloan, Jadan mentioned politicians then. If we look at leadership across the board, if we look at the United States Congress, for instance, there's not much we see in the way of compromise, in the way of coming together, in the way of agreement. I mean, you do get some very non-controversial bills which will pass with the support of both parties, but they often disagree on very high-profile legislation because of this heightened political polarization that we see. I mean, we see that when, you know, their prospective justices for the United States Supreme Court coming before the Senate for approval, we see the divisions. They're very stark at that time. How did the United States get to this point?
Well, unfortunately, I think this is a matter of following the leader. Trump has been the divider in chief in this regard in terms of pushing that type of polarization between the parties. And I agree with the last two speakers regarding some of the reasoning behind this is due to the proliferation of social media and the radicalization of people through those mediums. However, I will push back a bit on what I perceive to be a false equivalency here. I do agree that the far left and the Democrats can engage with a lot of rhetoric, but there's often not any action behind that rhetoric. Whereas on the Republican side, with far right-wing extremists, we have violence. We have an attempted kidnapping of Gretchen Whitmer. We have an attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband. We have a murder of a state senator in Minnesota, Melissa Hortman, and a shooting of John Hoffman, who's also a state senator in Minnesota. And of course, we have the January 6th riots at the U.S. Capitol. So there's violence behind that extremism coming from the right. The Cato Group just did a study noting that the right-wing extremists are the second most violent group in this country, second to only Islamic extremists in terms of violence that is domestically based. And you have to also, they are responsible for, I think, 11% of the violence in this country. So as usual, you know, the Democrats, yeah, they got a lot of mouth, but there's not a lot of action behind a lot of the Democratic rhetoric, whereas on the Republican side, there's often bullets. And that's something that we need to be aware of, we need to be cognizant of, and try to understand that these issues and these divisions that you were talking about, excuse me, this is my cat that's trying to come in the shot here. These issues and divisions that we are talking about need to be addressed on a bipartisan basis. Both parties need to address the extremism within our ranks. But let's not be fooled. A lot of that violence where people are getting killed is coming from the right.
All right, Adolfo, there are some commentators who believe that the violence we saw unleashed against Charlie Kirk in Utah has much deeper roots. Let's listen to Keith Boykin. I'm sure you know him. He's worked in the Bill Clinton administration, and he appears regularly as a commentator on other cable networks. Let's listen to what he had to say.
The murder of Charlie Kirk has plunged America into a dark and dangerous place. And frankly, I don't know how we get out of it. But I do know this. We can't keep lying to ourselves about who we are as a country. Every time a burst of public violence disrupts our illusion of America, we hear the same empty ritual. This is not who we are. Violence has no place in America. Those are lies. This is exactly who we are. America was birthed in violence, founded in the brutality of genocide and slavery, and it continues to be violent today with more gun deaths per capita than any other industrialized society.
What do you make of that? Does he have a fair point?
Well, not the America I grew up when I was younger, probably the oldest person on the set, so something has absolutely changed. But I understand the point, but I don't share that point of view. But as my good friend here, Douglas, brought up some points, he fails to mention the attempts on the life of the President of the United States twice. I don't think those were right-wing extremists. Secondly, I don't recall a program, at least I wasn't invited to do, about Lisa Hortman. I would have loved to have done it. She, of course, sided with many Republicans, including one key vote to deny illegal immigrants as a Democrat benefits, and then I'm not sure that was the reason she was killed, but she didn't fill a certain narrative. But there's a chilling statistic here. There's a Pew, which I don't think is a right-wing poll, that shows Republicans were asked if they think violence is appropriate response in the political arena. 90% said no. I'm ashamed of the 10%. They asked the same question for Democrats, 50% said yes. And they asked Democrats if violence would be appropriate to remove Donald Trump from office, and 39% said yes. Now, talk about the right-wing extremists. I never hear my friend talking about Antifa, all the things we had to endure 5 years ago, the violence, the deaths, and so forth. I think the president is on the verge of designating Antifa a leftist organization. But I'll tell you why Charlie Kirk was important to many Americans who are not political. He was a known figure, and when you have American Airlines pilots and Delta, to my friend Frank Sesno, Delta pilots, American Airlines pilots being fired, Matthew Dowd, an NBC reporter, saying horrific things, people celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk. That, I think, is what has taken people to a new level here. And that's why I think this is and I mean this is a good pun, a turning point. And a turning point to say, yes, people across the political spectrum are not perfect, but there is a drive, and there is a drive by these people on the left for a long time to use the words Hitler, Mussolini, resistance, like I said repeatedly, and these are public office holders. So they are challenging the legitimacy and trying to silence. You have the former president of the United States, Joe Biden, saying that MAGA extremists, Trump supporters, MAGA extremists, that's me and 75 million, now 80 million Americans who voted. The president of the United States saying that. So I don't recall attacking the Democratic Party or supporters on that basis, and that is the big difference. You know, they have no problem when they were saying white supremacy is the threat. Really, when they talk, I never hear it about Antifa and the leftist organizations that are actually behind this hateful speech.
Okay, I want to get to Frank on this point. Frank, it's an important point that Adolfo raises, and that is, you know, people getting fired for what they thought about the assassination of Charlie Kirk, for what they said. In fact, there's a Republican representative from Louisiana, Clay Higgins, who says, I'm going to use congressional authority and every influence with big tech platforms to mandate immediate ban for life of every post or commentator. I mean, he goes on, he's prescribing some pretty stiff penalties for people who celebrate or, you know, portray in any positive way the death of Charlie Kirk. Now, as a journalist, what do you make of that?
I think we have a lot of things going on here, and like I said earlier, this is complicated, and if we're going to get serious about it, we need to acknowledge that. Yes, it is intolerable to be saying some of the things, celebrating this terrible violence that we have seen, whether it's Charlie Kirk or whether it's the official from United Healthcare who was shot in the back. People did that too. They celebrated the death because they were angry at their insurance company. This is happening too because people have this sense that they can say anything. That it's not anonymity, because in many cases you can see who's saying it from their social media account or anywhere else. But we have lowered the threshold of discourse in this country to a place where people celebrate the death of an innocent human being. We have a disease. If you take someone to a doctor and you're told that person has cancer or has a life-threatening disease, you pull out all the stops to figure out what's wrong and what can be done. That's what we should be doing now. And politicians, leaders, not just politicians, leaders on all sides need to be saying what we need to do is figure out what is going on here. And we're going to ask those questions of everyone and what we need to pull back. Yes, people have been fired for their opinions, and I find that just ghastly. But this administration has fired thousands of people for no cause, and in some cases for their opinions or their past actions. So let's be careful about how we talk about all of this. We just have to, I just think that this is of such serious, nature right now, that we need to get off these high horses, and everybody needs to be looking internally.
Yeah. Jadan Horyn, on the question of social media, and we've heard that being mentioned several times so far, what appears on Facebook or X or Instagram or Truth Social or Blue Sky for that matter is largely unregulated. I mean, the very graphic video that we saw of Charlie Kirk's shooting being a case in point, and we often hear these very inflammatory sentiments being expressed as well. The Utah Senator John Curtis says there is just zero liability for what people are putting out there. Is this a time when social media should be regulated?
I don't believe the answer here is politics or even policy. I think it's cultural. The social media companies should take it upon themselves to self-regulate on these things and understand that graphic violence does something to the human mind. It desensitizes us, and that it has no place. We saw that with the church shooting that occurred in, the mass shooting in Christchurch, New Zealand, where social media companies were quick to take that down because it was so insanely graphic and damaging. They saw it as almost like a gamification, the mass murder of people. I don't believe the government walking in and creating these regulations is going to solve it. It needs to be that companies, that people, that our culture says that this type of things, just like we did with the Emmanuel AMU shooting by Dylan Roof down in South Carolina, that the culture says, no, this is not acceptable. And we need to step back from the precipice of glorifying violence, taking joy in people's death, whether they're innocent or, even guilty in your mind. The CEO of United Healthcare was guilty in many people's minds because his company made decisions. But, vigilante justice is not the answer. And we have given over violence to the state to commit on people's behalf, not for people to do it for their sense of justice. And, Congress can act, the president can act, and they're going to because there's feelings. But the culture itself has to react. Religious leaders, cultural leaders, and why Charlie was interesting. It was, yes, he was political, but he wasn't a politician. He was just as much as a cultural figure, and that means that we are looking at a new era of a type of assassination, a new era of vilification of people who aren't connected to politics per se. They're not elected leaders. They're merely people who speak out, speak up, and are involved and are activists. It's a target on everyone. So I think everyone needs to wake up and understand that if we don't address this in our culture, our politics is downstream of it. It's not going to change our culture.
Let me get Douglas Sloan's view on that. Douglas, do Democrats realize or recognize this risk that the country faces right now, that it could, as Jadan said, enter a new era of assassinations? I mean, has there been a Democrat leader who's come out and also, gone above the fray and said, look, it's a time for the country to come together?
Well, I would think that that is the overall tone and tenor of most elected Democrats. We are not the party of violence, contrary, or rather, in supporting what I said earlier. Adolfo brought up the survey that they did, I think he said with Pew, regarding 50% of Democrats saying that they endorse violence. It just supports my point. Democrats aren't going to get violent with anybody. White supremacists will. White supremacists will go shoot up Mother Emanuel Church while people are worshiping. Neo-Nazis will. We know the history of Nazis in this country. So, there is a strong history of violence in this country, coming from white supremacists, coming from neo-Nazis, coming from the right, but not so much from the left. The left is a lot of lip when it comes to these issues. So obviously the left doesn't want violence. The left is in favor of saving the environment, saving the trees, saving the whales, saving the fish. They're not violent. We're not violent towards people. And the overall arching theme of Democrats at this time would be, let's return to normalcy here. Let's get back to a time where we can engage in constructive dialogue to try to solve some of the more important issues facing this country and get down to brass tacks regarding kitchen table issues like hyperinflation, potential recession.
Okay, I want to get to Adolfo very quickly. Adolfo, you've got 30 seconds.
30 seconds. While they're saving fish in the environment, they're attacking the courthouse in Portland. They're conducting riots across the country. They're taking over a police precinct in Minneapolis. 35 people lost their lives during this fraud Black Lives Matter movement. They, in addition to that, caused $2 billion worth of damage. They tried to storm, and since Governor Cox was quickly so understandably praised for his comments, you should run the other comments, he said. When this happens, conservatives pray and come together. Democrats riot. That's Governor Cox.
We are going to have to leave it there. I'm sure there's lots more to say, but we have to leave it there. We've run out of time. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat.